Hi, I'm Scott Shay, and I am the co-founder of Signature Bank, which we grew from $42.5 billion to $83 billion. And I'm also the author of In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, and I am one of the passionate few. First of all, thank you, Omar. I hope people get out of this that you should be a whole person, faith and business or whatever. It doesn't necessarily need to be faith, but morality in business. But you need to be a whole person. I hope people get that out of this.
Hey guys, welcome to this episode of the Passionate Few podcast. Today we have a very special episode as we're sitting down with somebody all the way in the East Coast, none other than Scott Shay. He's the co-founder and president of New York Signature Bank, but he's also the author of In Good Faith. And today he's going to share his incredible story about how he became an entrepreneur and the life lessons he's learned. And you guys are going to get a ton of wisdom from it. So with no further ado, thank you so much for being on the show, Scott.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Omar.
Yes, it's an honor to have you on the show here. So can you give the audience a little bit of context as to the scale of New York Signature Bank? Because before we get into your story, I really want the audience to get a grasp of just how big you guys have built this beautiful New York Signature Bank.
Well, it's a fascinating story, and one day it'll be probably a case study. I had this crazy idea in the 90s that New York was over branched but underbanked. There weren't enough high quality banks in New York, focusing on the middle market. And there were the big banks, which at the time were just merging and consolidating in a ridiculous kind of way. They were good at servicing the huge mega companies, the Verizons, the IBMs, the PepsiCos, but they were good at mass market retail because they had the scale. But the vast bulk of people in the middle weren't being well served. So I had this idea, and I was joined. I persuaded two people to join me, who became my co-founders, Joe DiPaolo and John Tamberlane, and we started the bank from scratch with $42.5 million in capital. We had 50 million in assets 20 years ago. Today, without any acquisitions, we've never made a single acquisition, just by growing the company. Everybody who's come into the bank has wanted to be here. Well, let me just tell you, we broke even after 21 months. We went public after 34 months. Today, we're an 83, or as our last reporting, we were an over $80 billion bank. And we've gone from a very tiny market cap to a very large market cap.
Yeah.
And it's all been by paying attention to clients and doing the right thing.
I love that. And I love that you guys always mention that you guys did it a little bit differently. Can you talk a little bit about, just to give context before we kind of dig into your story, as to how your guys' business model was a little bit different and sort of what inspired that?
Yes. So first of all, there's two basic concepts that the bank is built around, which is safety. So during the financial crisis, the great financial crisis, we were the only bank in the United States above $4 billion not to have a down year. We made more money in 08 than 07, more money in 09 than 08, et cetera. Our deposits have gone up. There was one blip, but in our 81 quarters of life, our deposits have gone up in 80 of them. And one time we had a large escrow deposit leave us, so we missed on that one. And so we have we keep our balance sheet really, really clean, so that, again, people don't have to worry about their money. The second thing we do, which is critical, is that we have a single point of contact. So in most banks, if you want a mortgage, you go to one place. If you want a commercial loan, you go in another place. If you want deposit products, you go in another place. If you need a letter of credit, you go in a different place, et cetera, et cetera. We have a single point of contact. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't specialists behind the curtain, but you just need to have the phone or the cell phone of your banker. And we give that personal service. Now, that means we're not a retail bank, we're a middle market bank. But we consistently give, and I hear this from clients all the time. Virtually nobody, one of the secrets to our growth is virtually nobody ever leaves this bank once they become a client because they like the service so much. So there's next to no churn. There's no churn, really. people just don't leave us. And because they know that, by the way, we don't say yes to everything. They know we say no, but we give them a fast no.
Mhm.
We don't drag people around. We give people answers, and we treat people, and this is really what the bank is founded on, and we might get to this later, but it's something I put into the standards of conduct, which is that, so most banks have 50-page standards of conduct. We do too, ethics and conduct. But ours starts out this way. If you, this is a long document, you need to read it all, but if you remember one thing, you will keep yourself and us out of trouble. Don't do anything to any client, colleague, counterparty, vendor, or anyone you come in contact with that you wouldn't want done to yourself.
Mhm.
Treat everybody the way you would want to be treated. The rest of this 50 pages is commentary. You have to read it, but just remember that.
Mm.
And it's really the golden rule. Don't do unto someone else what you wouldn't want done unto you. And I think that's such a core idea that we've lost track of
Mhm.
as a society. We've lost track of as individuals.
Mhm.
We unfortunately are in an era where people are treated much more as objects or sales potential or contacts or networking
Mhm.
nodes.
Mhm.
And that concept of every client. So when PPP happened, I assume a lot of your listeners know about the Paycheck Protection Program.
Mhm.
So from the get-go, we knew this was going to be important to our clients because we have a lot of middle market clients. So we had a saying. We didn't do what some of the banks did, which is to say, okay, we're gonna prioritize our private banking clients or our borrowing clients or this clients or that client. We said no compliant client left behind. So look, you had to comply. We can't take non-compliant applications, but as long as you complied, we were going to get it done. So we reorganized our bank, took 25% of the people of the bank and reoriented them to doing PPP. And people were staying up all night. I mean, we had people on 2-hour shifts at various times. They were sleeping 2 hours or 4 hours, working 2 hours, literally around the clock. I mean, it was so amazing. And because my colleagues knew that people were depending on these loans. And if they were on the other side, if they had the dry cleaners, if they had the restaurant or the laundry or the accounting firm or the small law firm, they knew that they'd want to be treated that way.
Right.
And it was that ethos that really got this bank. I think I really privileged because I worked hard, but I wasn't. We had many people who were up all night for
Mhm.
weeks, but to just read the thanks that we got from people and the
Mhm.
jobs that we helped keep
Mhm.
for people and firms. It was just
Treating them
amazing.
treating them like human beings rather than just prospects.
Treating them like human beings as opposed to, we're going to rank your profitability.
Right.
Like, somebody, you're the most profitable, so we're going to do your PPP loan first. We did not do that. We said anybody who applies, we're going to get you through.
Mm.
Now, by the way, we can only take clients because you can't do that for the world.
Yeah.
So we just took clients. But if you were a client, essentially every client, again, there are a few people who didn't qualify for this reason or that reason, but that wasn't on us.
Mhm.
Every single client who was compliant got a loan.
Mm. Now, Scott,
Period.
I want to ask, where did you learn that type of, because a lot of people say it and it sounds nice, but a lot of companies, they don't actually practice what they preach, and I'm sure you know this as well as anybody. It could be in the mission statement, but in the culture of the employees and the culture of the team, it's not exuded as much as it is in the mission statements or whatever. Did you learn this in your prior entrepreneurial endeavors, the importance of treating people, or sort of where did you pick up on a business level just how much that's important to the retention of customers in your business?
So look, let me just say it this way, because I can get to the past, but when we decided to start the bank, our original money source.
Sorry to interrupt, but there's like a ruffling sound.
Oh, this is probably the microphone. Okay. better. It was probably against me. When we started the bank, our funding source was Banca Paulim and my other two partners. And actually, all three groups but me preferred to buy an existing small bank and get going. And my partners will freely admit this today, is that I was very passionate, to use your term, about not doing that, starting the bank from scratch. So we had to file 19 applications. Starting a bank from scratch is not so easy. But the reason that I felt so strongly about that is because then we got to build the culture ourselves. And we could do it person by person. And I can't overstress how important that is. I mean, the most important thing to me is getting the right colleagues, because it's all about the people. In the end, it doesn't even matter what the assets are, if they're manufacturing, if they're money, if they're whatever. If you have the wrong people, you got to get the right people on the boat or on the bus, whatever term you want to use. And then you can build the culture. And also, senior management has to walk the walk. We can't say, you need to treat your clients well. You need to treat your counterparties well. We have to do that. We have to do that. And we have to model that. And we have to model that with our colleagues, treating people correctly, treating people appropriately. And you know, look, I'm a big believer that there's a lot of things that can be caught but not taught. And that's one of them. Treating people right. You can have all the seminars you want, but if you don't demonstrate it when times aren't good. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. During the 2008 crisis, a lot of people, banks were withdrawing loan approvals and commitments. And we said, it wasn't necessarily great, but any loan that we committed to, we were going to close. And again, in 2000, just last year in 2020, when rates changed dramatically due to COVID, anything that we committed to, we lived up to. And that's important. It's important.
From a business standpoint or a senior executive standpoint and president standpoint.
Well, I'm chairman.
Oh, a chairman standpoint.
Executive chair. Yeah, I'm chairman.
As executive chairman, what were the sort of, I guess, biggest challenges that you guys found during these economic downtimes where you wanted to be right by your customers, but did it put you guys in a pinch? I mean, what were just decisions that, people would be surprised to know that weren't so easy to make, just to kind of give, aspiring entrepreneurs a little bit of context of, how to handle pressures and what are the kinds of ways of making decisions that, in the long run you found fruitful during tough times?
Yep. Well, that's a great question, because the great financial crisis, I mean, AIG was blowing up. Lehman was blowing up. I mean, literally down the block from us, companies were blowing up. Lehman's, a few blocks from here, and Bear Stearns is a few blocks the other way, or was a few blocks the other way. And those firms are no more. Excuse me. So one thing is something that you have to do prior to a crisis. And that is not lose your head with fads. So in 2006, I was in with the CFO at the time, the then CFO. He became chief operating officer. And we had a big investor who came in and said, you guys are not good stewards of my capital. He said, other banks are buying AAA subprime bonds. You guys are buying Ginnie Maes and Fannie Maes. Other banks are doing construction lending and they're getting high rates. You won't do any construction lending. Other banks are paying dividends and letting their capital get a little closer to the requirements. And you guys are holding on to my money. And so look, the reason we didn't have a downturn during 2008 was because what we had done in 5 and 6 and 7. which is not to do risky stuff, because we treat the other golden rule that I have is don't make any loan that you wouldn't be happy to show you to your depositors. Don't take undue risks. So um, we didn't have that really risky portfolio going into the financial crisis, and that was fantastic. So those same people who were criticizing us earlier for not taking appropriate risks were much happier, obviously, that we hadn't done it. And yeah, I mean, that's really it. It's, once you're in the crisis, then it's up to you to stand up and to do the right thing. So there were a few times when we could have walked away from loans or walked away from commitments, usually because of interest rates, and we would have been better off. But we didn't do that because, again, we want people to view us as stand-up folks. And the only way you can say that from day until night, but if you don't demonstrate that, it's not there. And by the way, people understand, people hear, and we developed, I think, a good reputation during that time. It's ironic because our growth really took off at the great financial crisis. I'll tell you one story that's a little bit funny.
Yeah.
When we launched the bank,
Mm-hmm.
we had an event for everybody, essentially, just about everybody. And I got up and I said this out of the seat of my pants. I said, my vision is that in 5 years, we're going to be a $5 billion bank. And in 10 years, we're going to be a $10 billion bank.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, that would have meant our growth would have slowed, but I didn't think of it at the time.
Yeah.
And I just was really thinking about the audacious goal of a $5 billion bank and 10. And what happened was 5 years came. And you know what? We were a $3.8 billion bank.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, gee, was I thinking wrong? Was I, are we doing something that we shouldn't be doing? And we really talked, again, Joe, John, and myself, about what we were doing. And we felt like we were on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
And that what we were doing were the right things. So fast forward to 10 years, when I predicted we'd be a $10 billion bank, we were a $14.8 billion bank. We're almost $15 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And after 20 years, we're an $83 billion bank.
Mm-hmm.
So if you keep doing the right stuff and the values are there, you're going to succeed. If you don't, then, that's when you, start doing all sorts of, you get distracted and you start doing all sorts of things that take you away. We are, and I am, passionate about doing what we do well, serving clients, and growing in adjacent ways.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you mentioned the kind of pressure from outside forces to maybe make decisions that were against the ethos, but might have been more profitable in the short run. How important, and I'm curious if you've seen other entrepreneurs, because I'm sure at this stage you've met a ton. Have you seen a common denominator where people in the short term, for lack of a better expression, left money on the table, but in the long run that paid off, in dividends, compared to just capitalizing on every opportunity, every fad? I mean, have you seen that pattern, not just in the banking industry, but across spectrum with a lot of different entrepreneurs you've associated with?
So I think it's a great disease, unfortunately. If you ask people at the bank some of my sayings,
Yeah.
one thing I'll say, and everybody's heard me say this, is I believe in being long-term greedy, not short-term greedy.
I love that. That's smart. Yeah.
So so many people have heard me say that here at the bank. You got to make the long-term greedy decision. And you know what our problem is? Even we've done that as a nation. I mean, we let our manufacturing get hollowed out
True.
by
Yeah.
being short-term greedy because, frankly, businesses, our telecommunications manufacturers, they all thought it was cheaper to make equipment in the Far East. And so, boom, when COVID hits, we find out we don't have manufacturing of telecommunications equipment. When COVID hit, we found out that we didn't have the raw ingredients to make ibuprofen. That's all being made in the Far East, and we're importing the raw ingredients. Because the short-term thing is drive down your costs and pay buyback stock. And that's just, I mean, to my mind, that's ridiculous. But when I say it's a disease, I say that mindfully, because we've used to be a country for many years that looked long-term and had a plan, had a vision. And now, at least in the corporate world, too often, the vision is extremely short-term. You don't hear people talking about what their business is going to look like in 2030.
Right.
It's quarterly reporting. What is your guidance for the next quarter? And that's one of the reasons we don't give guidance for our earnings.
And I feel like it's also easy to get lost if you're doing that. If you're just trying to maximize revenue for the quarter or the month or the year, you take your eye off the bigger picture and you make different decisions based on different time horizons.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
But you know, it goes also to setting a plan and being long-term greedy. Let me give you another example. You mentioned I'm on the East Coast. So for many years until 2019-ish, we were an East Coast bank. 2018, we made our first move out to San Francisco. And we dipped our toes in the water. And ultimately, we opened an office in San Francisco. And then we decided we're going to go to LA too. During COVID, we kept hiring. We kept building out our business, even though it's harder to get clients, you know, without having face-to-face meetings. It's harder to get clients. But we said, okay, this is the time for the opportunity for us to build. So we bore extensive expenses, knowing that it was going to take a little while to pay off. And, you know, already we can see that that's happening as you know, as the West Coast, as now people are, again, thinking about banking and the like on, you know, in San Francisco and LA. So it's the long-term greedy is part of our DNA.
And was it hard to get all your founding partners on board with that initially? Because I'm sure there's, you know, a lot of sort of discussion and a lot of people watching this, maybe entrepreneurs who have partners. And I'm sure, you know, right, with partnerships, people have different opinions, and getting people on the same page, long-term vision is not always easy. What advice do you have for entrepreneurs out there about, you know, sort of when they have business partners, to make sure everybody's on the same page when they want to stand, you know, they want to stand for an ethos, but maybe not everybody's seeing the same sort of picture? What advice do you have to kind of get all of leadership on the same page?
So if I one piece of advice for entrepreneurs who are partners, it's this. Before you enter the partnership, and I can certainly say I did this with Joe and John, you need to spend so much time with them. It should not be love at first sight. I mean, I had lunches, breakfasts, dinners, spent oodles and oodles of time with Joe and John. When you are talking about a partner, it's the most important thing. I mean, you can recover in business from almost anything, except for bad partners. You can't recover. It destroys businesses. And so you may not agree. And by the way, we don't agree all the time, but no one outside of the room knows that.
Right.
When we make a decision, you cannot tell who agreed or disagreed among the three of us. We'll execute it. And it's just what we're going to make happen.
I love that. I love that. And now take me back. Where did you sort of grow up, and where was this entrepreneurial bug planted in you when you were younger? Where did this entrepreneurship all begin for you back in the day?
Well, I grew up in Chicago. My father was a Holocaust survivor who lost his father was murdered essentially in front of him. His brothers, his aunts, his uncles, his cousins, everybody was murdered. His mother had died in childbirth previously with a brother, so she was not there at the Holocaust. But my father got to America when he was liberated by the American forces from Dachau. He was in the 60s of pounds, and it took him a year to get back to health.
Wow.
And when he got to Chicago and got married and had a son, I mean, he knew about good and evil, and he knew about individuals,
Mhm.
and how interaction is important, how you have to make this world a better place. It has to be part of you.
Mhm.
Speaking of catching, being caught but not taught in terms of many things, I caught a lot of things in terms of that passion, understanding, caring about people,
Mhm.
knowing that feeling like every individual has some spark of divinity that has to be found, feeling like you have to have a mission in life.
Mhm.
And so I certainly caught that from my father.
Mhm.
And you know, I mean, what he went through, he was literally in hell and got out and came back. So I learned that, and that had a tremendous impact on me throughout my life. And I think you've got to live your life in a way. It's not only about, by the way, making money.
Right.
It's about leaving this planet a little better place, because ultimately everyone returns to dust.
Mhm.
And how do you do something positive in this time frame? So there's a lot of things that the bank does and could have and doesn't do,
Mhm.
because we do want to leave our footprint to making this a better place, to making this planet a better place. And we look at that in folks we do business with.
Mhm.
Um, it's part of the golden rule. We don't want people who are going to mess up the environment, mess up the world, mess up communities.
Right.
We try very, very hard not to be involved with those folks.
Mhm. Makes sense. Now, what about your first sort of endeavors into entrepreneurship early on, and sort of that sort of awareness and sensitivity, and the cadence you picked up from your father? How did that integrate early on into your career? Were you always, entrepreneurially driven? Did you kind of always know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Were you trying a bunch of little things here and there with limited success or failure? Or what was your application? What was Scott's application with that
Yeah.
wisdom into entrepreneurship early on?
So I was the first person on either side of my family ever to go to college. I went to Northwestern, then I went to Kellogg Graduate School of Management,
Mhm.
and I got a job at Solomon Brothers of those days, which was an investment bank. And I was doing investment banking. And so I was working within a partnership. So there was already a feeling, it later became a corporation, but there was somewhat of a feeling of entrepreneurship. But I had the bug that I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Um, and I, um, can you hear me, by the way? You're frozen.
Yeah, yeah,
You can
you're
hear
good.
me? Okay.
Yeah, it froze
I
for a
had the bug.
second. Then.
Okay. So should I go back to I had the bug?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. I had the bug that I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but I
Mhm.
didn't know what it was. And then an opportunity came in that Lou Ranieri, who I'd worked with at Solomon Brothers, was starting a private equity fund. And he made an offer for me to join. I would have to take my compensation would fall by 2/3.
Mhm.
My salary, my yearly compensation. Obviously, I was have a stake in the company,
Yeah.
which would hopefully be worth a lot more. But I was willing to take a 2/3 decline in salary to join him to start this private equity fund, and
And
it
how old
worked
were
out
you at
well.
the time? How old were you at the time?
How old was I? I
Yeah.
was 30.
Okay.
I was 30. Yeah, I was 30.
Mhm.
So I'd worked at Solomon Brothers for like 8 years.
Mhm.
And I was promoted to being director. So I was associate vice president. Then I was promoted to director. And after I was promoted to director, within a few weeks, I resigned. And it stunned people because here I was promoted. The next step was, essentially managing director partner. But I was willing to walk away from it to start something new.
Mhm.
And with Lou we did. And I been doing entrepreneurial stuff ever since. I've been involved with startups, serially. So it's not just Signature Bank, but I was involved with Bank United of Texas. I was involved with Shell Point, Super Derivatives, Citus out on the West Coast. So I've definitely loved seeing cultures and organizations start out small and then grow to their full potential. And I get pleasure from it, because also I feel like if you're doing the right thing, you're creating good jobs, you're creating value. That's just like nirvana at a discount.
I like that. Well put. Now, when you started New York Signature Bank, I have two questions. Number one, how did you guys come up with the name, or what was the inspiration for the name?
Well, I'll tell you the story.
Yeah.
We held focus groups and we gave them 20 names.
Okay.
And the Signature was one of them. And they liked 4 names better. So we tried for those names, but they were all taken in one way or another. So we got to Signature and that wasn't taken. So we took it.
Yeah, I love it. That's a great name. And then the second question was, before you made that decision, were you sort of pondering other potential businesses or other potential avenues, or was that the red hot kind of inspiration for it? And the reason I ask is because, a lot of our audience is entrepreneurs, and a lot of them, face different opportunities in life and different ways they can go. And I'm curious, what was the determining factor at the time that you decided to kind of go all in with Signature Bank? Were there other things you were evaluating, and sort of what made you feel like, okay, this is the way to go? Particularly that you were, taking a little bit of a risk, right? That
Oh,
business
yeah.
model wasn't serving the market, and so arguably, now a couple $1 billion later, it makes sense. But at the time, you didn't sort of know it would pan out. So, what advice do you have for that, and sort of what was guiding you that you think worked out in the long run at that time?
Well, I did again when we left. So I was convinced there was an opportunity here. I thought that the overconsolidation of banks in New York really paved the road for for an entity like Signature Bank. So I was definitely, I had a high level of conviction, but again, I left full-time private equity
Right.
to do this. So there was some. Now, look, I'm being perfectly honest. I was in a better financial position to do that then,
Right.
and life was different in that sense. But I definitely, knowingly, willingly took, the step down of leaving full-time private equity, start a bank that, in the end, when we started, our negative monthly run rate was $2.5 million. I mean,
Yeah.
we had no deposits, no clients, no nothing. I mean, we succeeded, but nobody knew that day one. As a matter of fact, a lot of people thought we would flop. People would tell me that to my face.
Yeah.
That we're not going to make it.
What's the closest you guys ever came to not making it?
On that, that was not an option.
I love that.
Not making it was just not an option. We were going to figure out how to make it.
I love that. And what role? I know you wrote a book, In Good Faith, and I know spirituality is a big part of your mindset and your success. What role is spirituality playing in all this, in the background, and your confidence and sort of your faith in things? If you could kind of shed some light on that for the audience.
Sure. So in addition to being banker, I really take writing seriously. So I think that every one of us has 2 really, really important days in our lives. One is when we're born, because we get a chance, we've got life. And the second is when we figure out why we're here. What is our mission on this planet? How can we make this planet a better place? Now, for some, it doesn't have to be, you have to become president or governor or mayor or something. It can be in a small way, with your family, with your coworkers, with your community. But what am I doing what is my mission on this world, and figuring that out. Now, the sad part is some people go through their whole lives without figuring that out. They just start and they end. And when they end, they end. But they didn't find why they were here. And when you personally feel what your mission is on this earth, then that changes everything. It really does. Uh, and and so spirituality, and by the way, part of the golden rule is recognizing everyone else has that special role, has some special role. I don't know what it is. Omar, I don't know what your role, your special role is on this earth. It might be something that comes out of this podcast. I don't know what other people's special role are, but I'm convinced you have them. I'm convinced that each of us has some spark of divinity, or certainly, if you're a non-believer, shared humanity. And that finding that out in the other person is important, and recognizing that every other person is it, because you treat the other person as though they are also a seeker for their place in this world. So the thing that I think is our big problem right now in society, I talked about the disease of short-termism, is self-deification. Because we live in a world where people don't go by the golden rule. They think they're better than others. Whether it, you see that on social media, you see that in many ways, and it's for the good and the bad. I mean, also this whole thing about, not listening to other people. If you were on the other side, you wouldn't want to be not listened to. And that's, again, the golden rule. Don't do unto someone else what you wouldn't want done unto you. And I think we have really, in society right now, sadly deteriorated, where there's just lots of self-deification, and it's because we've lost track of the golden rule. And so faith to me is very important. I mean, I wrote this book over 5 years, became obsessive about it. I interviewed, the pleasure was that I got to interview, I didn't interview any rabbis because I come from the Jewish faith, so I figured I could cover it, I had that covered, but I interviewed everyone from cardinals to evangelical preachers, to imams, to Islamic scholars, to Greek Orthodox, the whole gamut of believers. And I interviewed, and through the book tour, particularly before COVID, when I'd meet people in person, I spoke to a lot of non-believers. I did a Google Book Talk where I would guess most of the people in the room were not believers. And I'm certain from the conversation before and after that certainly a lot of people weren't. But having that interaction and talking about the importance to me personally of the Bible and of faith, wow. I'm so glad I wrote this book. I poured myself into it, talk about, passion. I mean, I gave up. I used to do, I've started again a little bit, but I used to do bicycling seriously. I used to do a lot of other things, and I sort of moved that all off in order to just write this book. And thank God it's had a good reception. It's had a couple of hardcover printings. It's had a paperback. It's gone Audible. It's gone book club. So I'm really, really gratified.
That's awesome. And what can people expect to learn from it or glean from the book if they pick it up?
Well, they can certainly learn the good and the bad of religion, because, just being ritualistically observant is problematic in my view. You can't pray in the morning and then spend the rest of your day praying on people. And too many people think they cover religion by doing the ritual stuff. The most important part of where the rubber meets the road is how you treat your fellow person, if you believe in this spark of divinity. And I go through the Bible. I try to explain what idolatry is, which I think is one of the key things in the book. I explain sort of the bad parts of I talk about the bad parts of the Bible, the awkward parts, the sense of good and evil. I talk about the historicity of the Bible, science in the Bible, and prayer. But I think one of the key points of the book, and if I could give you 2 minutes on this, and then I'll.
Yeah, of course.
But the key point, one of the key points of the book is what idolatry is. Because I was saying, I think that that's unfortunately what we're suffering from in this country, which is many people think idolatry is some sort of quaint bowing down to statues or Zeus or something like that. But in reality, the Bible makes it clear that idolatry is a set of lies about power. It's about ascribing super authority or superpowers to finite people like you and me, ideologies, or natural processes. So we may have thought that we licked idolatry thousands of years ago, with the God King Pharaoh. But in reality, the whole 20th century was a catalog of God King Pharaohs.
Mhm.
Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, the Assad family, the Kim family, Stalin, and I unfortunately could go on and on.
Mhm.
And they use the same tropes as the ancient folks of saying, um, poetry, pageantry, and all, of course, backed up theater, all, of course, backed up with secret police and informers and state sponsored violence.
Mhm.
And um, they, you know, succeeded. I mean, how did Stalin kill all of the kulaks, starve a quarter of the Ukraine, send tens of millions of people to the gulag?
Mhm.
Because he certainly didn't live by the golden rule. He wouldn't want to be sent to the gulag. And nobody questioned him because he had super authority. Because
Mhm.
people said if Stalin said it, that's it. If you were on a Stalin list to be killed, you were killed, you were murdered. Mao caused the death of 75 million of his countrymen. And here's the thing, it's not only the macro, but even in our most intimate encounters. So, how did Charlie Rose and Matt Lauer and Harvey Weinstein get away with what they got away with? Because
Mhm.
they set themselves up as idols. They were unquestioned and unquestionable.
Mhm.
So, what Charlie Rose said was truth. What Harvey Weinstein said, if you wanted your career to work, he could make it happen. He had super authority, or he could say, you're never going to eat lunch in this town.
Mhm.
And that's our central, I think, malady in the United States, which is this self deification. It's a micro problem and it's a macro problem.
Mhm. No, totally. Especially with the amplification of social media, because and when you have younger generations of kids that haven't matured enough to make these distinctions, then you have a whole population of people who grow up kind of I guess in a certain context subordinating to that sort of way of thinking and not even knowing it. It just becomes a part of it, and that becomes very dangerous for society if not sort of checked in with or poked through. So I love that. I love that. Now, is the reason you wrote the book? I mean, it must have been a really passion project for you. Is the reason you? I mean, you clearly don't need to write the book, but you wanted to write the book.
Yep.
Why did you think society needed this book, and what drove you to write it when you probably got a million other things going on?
I do, believe me. So first of all, I thought the lesson on idolatry was an important one.
Mhm.
But also, I had so many people come to me. I'd written a book prior about the Jewish community that was really written mostly for the Jewish community. It wasn't a general book. This book was written for everybody, and it's 80% of the folks I talked to on this book are not Jewish, at least. Um, I felt and that there were so many books written by Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, all of these sort of evangelical atheists. And there was no book on the other side explaining why it was rational to believe in God with
Mhm.
all we know about science and the historicity of the Bible and our sense of modern morality.
Mhm.
I thought there was a huge need for this book. And there has been. I mean, I know a lot of people send this book to their children who are in college because they're reading, they go to school, they go to college, and the professors say, yes, we understand you're still clinging to the superstitions of your parents, but don't worry, we'll educate you.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I mean, it's amazing how many stories I heard about that when I was on, live book tour,
yeah.
pre-Zoom book tour. You don't hear as much, on Zoom stuff, but when you're meeting people one-on-one,
They tell
after
you
doing
stuff.
signings, that's when people tell you these stories.
Yeah. Wow. That's inspirational. Now, I have to ask, there's a lot of entrepreneurs watching this, and, a big part of the show and a big part of when we interview entrepreneurs is we always try to deduce wisdom, lessons learned, from the trade, and, hard-earned lessons, right? Lessons that you can't teach in a classroom, experience have taught you. If you had to give a couple tenets to business, it doesn't have to be one, two, or three, whatever the number, but as we're in 2021, I'm sure you've seen over the past decades the way the nature of economics has evolved, the way the landscape of business has evolved, industries have evolved, some flourished, some not so, haven't done so hot. But to entrepreneurs out there looking to start a business or grow their current business, whether it's on a practical level or thinking, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs to really build a successful business long term, in the current economic situation, and going forward? What advice would Scott Shay give to aspiring entrepreneurs in any industry to really have long-term success in business?
Well, as I said, first thing is keep your mind on the long term. Make
Mm-hmm.
sure you're adequately capitalized to get to the long term. You can't be from credit card to credit card. You have to raise the money to make sure you have a cushion. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important and frequently overlooked because people think nothing will go wrong. Something always goes wrong,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately. So make sure you have a cushion.
Mm-hmm.
And but keep that long term. It's like what I said in year 5 when I had set the $5 billion um, goal and we were at 3.8. Keep your eye on the long term. Don't change if you're doing the right things. Don't change them.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, we're in a different world. I mean, 20 years ago, nobody would have known what a social media manager was. Nobody knew what social media was.
Right.
So you have to be open to change. I mean, Signature Bank, if Google us, you'll find that we started as a middle market bank, but we became the first bank in the United States to start a 24/7 um, money transfer system where you could, if you're in Tokyo, Toronto, Tbilisi, um, wherever, Toledo, you can transfer money among each other 24/7 good funds. It's called Signet. And
Mm-hmm.
it's the first blockchain. It was the first blockchain instantaneous money transfer system,
Mm-hmm.
where we essentially are the nodes of approval, where it's proof of authority. But who'd have thunk it? I mean, I didn't even know that we would be building a blockchain model,
Mm-hmm.
but we launched it midnight, 12:01 a.m. 2019. We wanted to show you can transfer money on New Year's Day, and it has grown tremendously. I mean, we're on a public. I can't give numbers because we're on a, on a. We have to do that in a public way, but it has grown tremendously,
Mm-hmm.
and it's one of the pillars. Again, if you Google us, you'll find it's something that who'd have thunk it. I
Mm-hmm.
would have not even known what block. I didn't know what blockchain is, and nobody did when we formed the bank. So you
Mm-hmm.
got to be prepared to move. You can't. While you have to have the long-term plan in mind, the world is a changing,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to be prepared to do that.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Now, what about, and I want to zoom in on this. What about when you saw other competitors or other banks? I'm sure when you started, you saw other, banks maybe taking on riskier stuff and getting ahead sooner, and you kind of had to stick to your guns, right? Um, I'm sure that happens in literally every single niche, every single industry and business,
100%.
although it may not be so obvious. That sort of parallel occurs. Um, what sort of what advice do you have for people about how they can apply that long-term greedy, so to speak, mindset? And I know there's a little bit of humor there and quite a bit of truth there, but in terms of, thinking long-term, is it like, I guess what I'm trying to get to is how important is it to just in advance know that, hey, sometimes you might need to leave what you perceive to be money on the table in the short term, in order to ensure stability and security for the long run. So you don't just have, a couple of hot years and then you fizzle out because you go belly up. So I guess, yeah, what advice do you have in terms of long-term thinking versus short-term thinking that you could impart to entrepreneurs, who might, things might be working, but they see the competitors getting ahead and they go, shoot, I don't want to miss the boat. And, am I being too careful? Am I, business is about not being scared. How to decipher, what is worth it versus if you're kind of doing something right, keep doing it. Think long term.
Well, that is indeed the hard question. So you're asking the right question, and it's part psychological. But the one thing that helps, I would say, is try to do the thought experiment of where you want to be in 5 years, or in 3 years, or in 2, but not next quarter. And you have to do that thought experiment. Really, I mean, Albert Einstein, that's the way he came up with, the theory of relativity, was through thought experiments. And you need to, that would be my one piece of advice, is it's very easy to consume them the moment. Now assume it's 2023 and come up with a few different scenarios. And once you have that scenario, say, okay, I want to be there in 2023. How do I get there? Because if you don't know what road you're taking, you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there.
Right.
So find out think about where there is, and then try to backtrack reverse engineer what the road to get you there was.
Yeah. Even if that means year one may not be the most profitable or whatever, you're thinking long term.
Yeah.
You'll make better decisions. I love that. Well, Scott, thank you so much for hopping on. And where can people find your book, In Good Faith, and learn more about some of the stuff you got up your sleeve that you're sharing with the world?
Sure. So please go to scottshay.com, SCOTTSHAY.com. And I write a lot about, you can order the book, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere that books are sold. It's really available. A lot of people like the audio version. The fellows, it's not me, it's someone with a much better voice than me speaking. So a lot of people actually, the audio version has been a surprise, very, very strong seller. And I write at scottshay.com, not only about faith, but I write about things like LIBOR, things like tax policy, corporate tax policy, all sorts of public policy issues, in addition to faith issues. So please visit scottshay.com. I will also say I have a new book coming out that's going to be released in October. And you can, by the time this is posted, probably it'll be at least available for pre-order on Amazon, which is called Conspiracy U. And I'll have to come back to tell you about that. But the 2-sentence description is, it's about how strangely conspiracy theories are masquerading as scholarship at some of our largest universities. And I really dig into folks who have confused scholarship and real research with conspiracy theories. And it's very troubling. So that's my next book. It's much shorter than In Good Faith. It's about the third of the size. So
I love it. Very cool. We'll make sure to put links also in the description so you guys can give it a listen and check it out. Scott, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. I know you're busy running a multi-billion-dollar bank, but thank you for stopping by and sharing your wisdom. And I look forward to a round 2 soon. Good things to you. Cheers. Thank you, Scott. Cheers.
If you guys enjoyed that video, be sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you the very best in personal development content, interviews, and insights to help inspire you to take your life and your dreams and make them a reality. And also, if you want to know how to book dream guests the same way I have, you can check the link below for my top 3 secrets. So if you have a podcast or a show or whatever it is and you want to collaborate with them, if you click that link below, I'll give you those top 3 secrets to help you get in touch with anybody. And also, don't forget that The Passionate Few is available on media platforms as well. So you can subscribe to the podcast. And until next time, thank you for being one of the Passionate Few.